Hi, Lee Maxey, CEO of MindMax. I'm delighted to be here with John Robichaux, who I've known for many years, mostly from summer sessions. But John is now the executive director at UC Berkeley in the Fung Institute for Engineering Leadership. And it's an exciting role, newish, and I just love to hear what it's been like in your first 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah, a couple of years now.
Yeah.
So, first of all, it's been really exciting. So it's just an incredible moment in history where about 15 years ago, most of the top of CEOs in Fortune 500 companies transitioned from having a business background to an engineering background. So tech and engineer executives or leaders suddenly are required to have a skill set that previously wasn't thought about with regard to technology and engineering and the unique dimensions of those spaces of leadership. So in the old days, you would get a degree in engineering, you'd be very focused on your problem solving, and at some point in your mid-career, you'd take a pause, you do some business training, maybe an MBA, and then you'd go on into leadership in your company. These days, engineers and technologists don't have that luxury. They're expected to have leadership skills from the beginning in order to lead teams, in order to get projects funded, in order to get solutions out there, in order to have the impact that they want. The Fung Institute was founded about 15 years ago, so right at that moment when it's realizing that the leadership needs of business and industry were transitioning to require technologists and engineers to have more of those skills from the beginning. And so, what we've been able to do is take programs across the lifelong spectrum, from the undergraduate through the end of your career, and find moments when you need leadership training as a technologist or an engineer to help you maybe move from an individual contributor to a management, from management to executive, from executive to your encore career going forward. And that's a view of engineering and technology that goes well beyond the technical solutions, but is essential for these leaders to have impact that they want with their teams and in their lives.
It's interesting. I have an analogous experience. I work with Chief Learning Officer magazine, and through around the same time, 15, 12 years ago, it became clear that the desire for a Chief Learning Officer was not someone that came from the learning and development field, but someone who came from the operations of the business and then developed an understanding of the requirements needed for learning and development to support the business. And it was a very significant shift. And some of the most successful CLOs over the last 10 years have been ones that have come from operations.
Right.
Similarly, just a different situation. So
yeah.
That's very interesting. And we work with schools where working with a school that wasn't from the business school or wasn't from the School of Management, and words like management were not allowed to be used.
Right.
So how is that working at Berkeley with engineering and I'll say other schools that might have a vested interest in some of the words that they own or
Sure.
they don't own, but
sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think at Berkeley is also a unique situation because Berkeley produces more founders than any other university in the country right now. We get more VC funding, than any other university in the country right now. And so, there's a real ethos across campus that, if you're engaged in problem solving, that you're also able to take a leadership perspective in that no matter what field you're in, whether you're in business or not. And so the Fung Institute actually, our leadership curriculum is taught by experts in engineering technology leadership who have also been in the field. And that distinguishes us from other top universities where a lot of times it's the latter ranked faculty who are required to teach your leadership courses. So we get folks who bring both the academic awareness and the real life professional expertise into our programming. And what's happened over the 15 years of the Fung Institute's development is that now the Haas Business School at Berkeley pulls from our instructors for their technology and engineering leadership curriculum, and our entrepreneur centers pull from our instructors. And so we've created a pool and an expertise that's recognized on campus and globally as unique in that technology and engineering leadership space.
Who knew? Playing well with others.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Exactly.
Playing well. That's really neat.
And now look, there's always, as any administrator will tell you, there's always the question of give and take. But our principle is There's something different about technology and engineering leadership that distinguishes it from the broader field, one. And two, when we bring people in the room together who think about leadership without a technology background and those with technology backgrounds who are now thinking about leadership in different ways, you get a unique mix. And you get folks who can translate and really heading towards more success and more impact in terms of the solutions. And that's critical at this moment in history in engineering and technology, where many of the world's greatest problems, bioengineering, sustainability, climate, energy, are really coming out of the engineering and technology space, much less all the conveniences that we live on with our phones and otherwise. And so having that leadership, that ability to impact, that leadership skill set, the ability to impact, and the ability to drive real world impact while playing nicely across the university is absolutely essential.
Almost sounds like a liberal arts approach to education.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because if you're thinking about technology and engineering more broadly, you've got people in public health who are very interested in how tech and engineering can impact, can drive success or better health outcomes. If you've got folks in policy, they're very interested in how AI or computer science or machine learning can help them better understand economics, better understand the policy impacts of their decisions and the real world impacts that we're seeing of various pilots that are tried at the state and local level, so that we can decide what makes the move from a state local initiative to something that gets rolled out for a company, for a government, for a country, for a region. And so the real world impacts always are engaging well beyond technology and engineering in their traditional sense, and really thinking about how those infuse everything we do at the university, but ultimately everything we do in society and in life for folks.
So in my mind, I often think policy lags behind what's actually going on in a response to, perhaps even a reaction to. Policies are changing right now very quickly in some fields. Can you talk about how you are trying to think through that evolution of policy, like you described, from local, state to federal to global, and also working backwards, bringing in, like you said, these other fields, whether it's philosophy or ethics or any number of things where some of these broad brush, we listen to the impacts of AI or bioengineering or any genetic modification in crops. All sorts of things, genetic modification in births of humans.
Yeah.
So interested.
Yeah, I think so. For me, my career spans a number of top institutions where I've had the privilege, whether at Harvard or Stanford or now at Berkeley, to be working closely with policymakers, decision makers at the federal, state, local, and even international levels. And so there's really, in my mind, always a two-way conversation that I want to be having. So on the one hand, they're needing to understand how the technology, how the fields are advancing in a deep level. And that's something that we at the universities can really help folks understand. What's on the cutting edge? What's around the corner? What are the policy implications that they need to be thinking about? So, my teams have run the largest AI trainings for the U.S. federal government. We ran the AI trainings for the European Parliament, for the White House, for Congress. And so in those conversations, they're able to ask us questions about the field today, but also what's coming next. But part of what I also ask my team to do, and that I sit in a position of often doing, is also hearing what are the challenges that they are dealing with as policymakers. What are the questions they're having to engage with, and what do they need to know, so that it's never, for my mind, just the university educating policymakers, but also policymakers helping us at the university understand that landscape as they see it. Because then what I get to do is I get to bring that back to the policy, to the faculty. What I get to do is bring it back to leaders in business, in the nonprofit sector, and philanthropy. All of the leadership roles that we get to engage with because of our position at a Berkeley, at a Stanford, at a Harvard. And then together, what I get to do with my team is be a conduit, a translator between, bringing information, having conversations back in the home, on home campus or globally, and then bring those back to members, policymakers and their teams. So here's what we're hearing about the problems you identified, the needs you identified. And then, oftentimes that's helpful. Let me learn more. Let's make the right kinds of connections. Oftentimes it's, I need to know more about this now. And so the conversation evolves. But as I'm thinking about how we engage with policymakers, I'm looking to engage in major sectors and major conversations that they're having to think about. So from health, from education, from international relations, to trade, to economics, all of those areas are being touched by the cutting edge developments in engineering and technology. And then all of them are things that the policymaker wants to think about. What should we make policy around? What shouldn't we? And that's the type of conversation that I hope to lead and that my team, has had success with in a variety of places. So what about this unique moment? Wild moment. I think, for our part, the fact that we have those relationships in DC and elsewhere with policymakers means that we're getting a chance to hear from them. Okay, this is what we're seeing coming. So then we get to take that back to home to our institutions. And these are the questions we're thinking about, even in this rapid transition. So for us, it's a little bit more being more quick in our conversations. We also know that a lot of things are happening quickly in DC. And so understanding the implications of what's known and what's unknown. And right now, a lot of our work is helping folks understand what's unknown about what's going to happen, in DC and elsewhere at the federal level.
And ramifications.
And the ramifications, right. Yep. And so for us, it's also being prepared to be agile, being prepared to get ready to move when an opportunity path opens up. And then at the state level, we have a fairly, for us in California, but also in many states across the U.S., we have a fairly steady state in terms of what's happening, in state legislations and the governor's offices, so that, they too are trying to react. And so we get to be good partners at the state level and say, okay, here's what's happening at the federal level, during this moment of a lot of great transition, a lot of change, but also a lot of unknowns. And so the state level engagements have actually become as or more important.
Right.
And, we're feeling a lot more like we're in the same boat of having to react and understand. And then what do we want to do locally? But also for a global brand like Berkeley or global institution like Berkeley, we're clearly committed to California. We're a state institution. But we have that global commitment too, and the national impacts that our research and that our leaders get to have. And so, we're thinking about California centrally, and we have the opportunity to also help other states, legislatures and other universities in other states lead those conversations where they're at.
A shift to, you've had people come through your program, they've gotten a degree, they're now out in the world working. They're experiencing change, they're experiencing application of what they learned, and a lot's changed since they graduated. Can you talk about engagement with that 10-year, 20-year, 30-year, 40-year alum who's out in the field and probably is in a leadership role in many cases, when they went through school, didn't have any of this, as they had pocket protectors and so forth.
Yep.
Maybe when they're in school. I'm sorry.
Sure.
So Gilbert, so
sure.
But talk about how you're connecting with and helping, and what you're doing to provide support in their staying current.
Yeah. Well, in engineering and technology, staying current is absolutely essential.
I mean, I didn't mean as much about engineering.
Sure, more broadly.
But the things you were talking about around, because I imagine they have to stay current.
Exactly.
And everyone's kind of like it's right in front of them. It's right there all the time.
Right.
It's in the other areas that weren't in their engineering education when they went to school.
Yeah. So the one key area is that leadership dimension I already flagged. I think the other key areas are, helping leaders of organizations think beyond their engineering and technology focus. So we've reverted back. We continue to see the value in the old T-shaped model, or the T-shaped model that's been around for a while. I don't want to say it's old; it's very current, where we have our areas of depth, and we have to be able to, as leader, to think more broadly. So as you get on in that 20, 30, 40 years into your career, the understanding of the appreciation for that model becomes ever more important. So we have leaders who are coming back to us and say, okay, help us understand not just the changing technologies and engineering that's, at the cutting edge of research and technology, like we were saying, is understood. We have to keep up with that, but also help us understand these generational shifts of the people we work with. So the workplace looks very different than it did, I mean, even 5 years ago. Think about the pandemic, of course, but 15, 20 years ago, the different generational modes and trends. That is something that we always think about in lifelong learning. So, as you get further on in your career, you're having to enter these new ways of thinking about your teammates, these new ways of thinking about leadership, and the ways that you fine-tune your engagement with your team become really important. Now, that becomes strategically important for organizational leadership, becomes strategically important if you're an educational institution thinking about touching different folks at different points in your career. It becomes strategically important as you're a leader in an organization, in industry, government, philanthropy, nonprofit, that needs to think about, how are you going to be most effective as you want to have the impact that you and your organization have to meet mission, and on the business side to have an effective organization. Now, it's interesting right now because I think there's a shift in the field of lifetime or lifelong learning. Two shifts that I think are pretty noticeable as I'm sitting here at UPSEA. One is, look, we're a lifelong learning conference and set of professionals, and we've always thought about, professional skills. Whole life. But I think right now that what we're seeing is a greater emphasis on that 65 and older group and thinking about them in a different way. So we've long had, OSHA Lifelong Learning Institutes, among other programs for that 65 and older crew. Often with an emphasis on life of the mind, where do you want to explore, things like this. But the generation that's coming into that age group now also is thinking about a much longer health span. So probably looking and thinking about 10, 15, 20 plus years of health where they can still engage in not just life of the mind exploratory work, which again had been a large focus of the field for a long time for this group, but also meaningful work and impact. And so that meaning, that impact with a longer time horizon is something that I think is getting a renewed emphasis or a deepening in our field. And you can really see that in the conversations that are happening here today. So I think that's an epical moment we're living through. One. Two, I think the other interesting thing is, we're entering this moment where we're entering with the boomers about to pass. We're entering with this moment in history where we're going to have the greatest wealth transfer in human history. And so, for institutions, I think there's a recognition that in lifelong learning and continuing education, there's been a real absence of attention to the philanthropic opportunity for the learners who come through our classrooms. Undergraduate and graduate students come to us for 4, 6, 8 years, right? And we're constantly hitting them up for philanthropic gifts and understand the connection and so on. But a lot of them, don't engage with the institution long term or don't give or don't see reasons for doing so. But lifelong learners often are engaged with institutions for 10, 15, 25 years at various points in their life and find that, this is really meaningful work. It's not just the rote experience of undergraduate or graduate that many of us expect, but in fact, there are these opportunities for career transitions, for degree completion, for upskilling, for exploration, for greater impact that are provided through lifelong and continuing education so that, hey, I want to get back to that. And so at UPSEA here, we're seeing a lot more attention the past couple of years to deans of lifelong and continuing education thinking, how can we tap that resource of folks who want to give, who see the importance of the mission of the institution, of our organizations, and who want to have a lifelong legacy beyond their lifetime. So I think, as we're watching today, maybe those are two things that I'm picking up in the UPSEA world, in lifelong and online. So greater attention to that later part of life and greater understanding that advancement is something that lifelong continuing education can be really affect or have an extraordinary impact for their institutions, and have an opportunity to create meaning, because we know that those who give, find that they're in their giving they are also they also come to a greater appreciation. That's something that is good for their health, for their life, for their how they perceive their value and their impact in the world too. So it's helping the individuals, it's helping the institutions. Ultimately, it helps the community because we get to impact more learners across a variety of life circumstances. So if the field really takes those two moments seriously and taps them for all the opportunity they really do represent, even in this complicated policy moment we're living through, I think there's real hope to take advantage and have a greater impact, which has always been the mission of lifelong learning.
I just came from a session that I did with Duke where they talked about connecting advancement and continuing ed in that exact way. And I wrote a piece a few years ago during the pandemic. I think there's a new market that's not OSHA lifelong learning, and it's not credentialing for professional work, but and I like the idea of so that I can do things that are meaningful in a next stage of my life. It might be I'm now doing volunteer or philanthropic work and need more education to do that better, to take the experience that I have, the life experience I have, professional experience, and to apply that in I'll call it a more impactful or effective way. And I think there's a market there. During the pandemic masterclass and all those, and OSHA have been around for a long time.
Yeah.
But that's almost, I'll say, survey.
Yeah.
And so there's something deeper than survey, but not getting certified.
Yes, that's right.
And there's something in between. And I think it's a population that, one, has time.
Yes.
Two, has health span length. Three, has money.
Yep.
A lot of income or available discretionary money to be able to use. And they want to have meaning. And meaning's important to that population. So I like the idea of legacy. I think that's an interesting, that brings it back to that advancement and connection point. So that's interesting.
And I think this is another example, Lee, where I think, and I've known you for many years, where your ability to see forward and think about what's around the corner, what gaps in the field are, is something that we really take value from in the field and appreciate. And I think, my comment is, I think the rest of us are catching up to what you wrote about 3, 4, 5 years ago, and seeing, now that we've had a few institutions with this type of success, people are starting, we're at that moment on the upswing of the curve where more institutions are going to take the lessons that you were trying to point us to back then and that other institutions are pointing us to now.
Yep. I know you have a background in summer sessions, pre-college, and this is an idea that I've been, thinking about and trying to explore. Is we know that the 18-year-old high school graduate is now saying, maybe I don't want to go to college right now for a whole lot of reasons. Yeah. Whether it's I don't trust, whether it's expense, whether is it relevant. But you have a lot of experience in summer and that summer session with that pre-college population for students or kids at that time, I'll call them kids, that were really looking to go to college for sure. I mean, those programs were not exploratory programs. Those were, I'm going to college and this is part of my path. But I think there's an opportunity to look at schools, maybe it's not the Berkeleys of the world, maybe it's regional publics. How do I do some ready for work kinds of experiences, leveraging what colleges and universities know about that transition from high school to work? So what are some thoughts you have around that?
Yeah, so I think this is absolutely essential for our society as a whole. First of all, in the United States, only a third of us actually graduate with an undergraduate degree. So 2/3 of the population are not going to go on to a 4-year degree or get a bachelor's degree. So this is probably the most important if you're looking just by weight of numbers and head count, right?
3.9 million graduates,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, there are a few things that I think currently exist that are really, that a lot of different educational institutions are thinking about. So there's dual credit. So in the community college and a lot of university state systems in particular are opening up their classrooms to high school students or younger students to give them college credit to accelerate them whatever path they might want. We've got other early college options where you can graduate with an undergraduate degree in 4 year in an accelerated fashion as well. But I think what you're asking about, and that 2/3 really is looking at something different. So, those are really important for that third that wants the bachelor's degree and understands the value differentiator that we have right now if you have a bachelor's in terms of your life outcomes, your health spans, things like this. Recently, or more recently, we see a lot of the attention to those who aren't going to get the undergraduate degree, of course, being left to community colleges. And I say left to because I think the four-year institutions are just saying that's not our lane. Right? But for those of us in lifelong learning and those of us who want to have greater impact across all of society, I think it's a fair question whether that's the right way to think, or if there are important partnerships or things we can learn at the four-year institution level from community colleges, junior colleges, other technical and trade schools, other types of educational entities that have had very good success in helping students carve out other life paths that don't involve an undergraduate degree. So technical, vocational, community colleges are the traditional home there. And I think, first of all, going back, Obama, so going back several years now, the Obama administration made a big push in this area, which has had, some level of impact. But I don't think it's a place we should be taking our foot off the brake for the reasons that I indicated. Huge part of the population, high impact. And, yes, it's always going to be the case that the Harvards, the Stanfords, the Berkeleys of the world are going to be drawing most prominently from those who want four-year degrees. But I don't think that means that we don't have a role to play, or that other four-year institutions don't have a role to play, especially for those of us who are in the lifelong learning, environment and who are thinking about micro-credentials. What is a micro-credential? Well, that sounds an awful lot like a technical or vocational, credential that you might get. Of course, maybe without the same certifications level, although that sometimes is there, sometimes it's not. So I think for those of us who are thinking about micro-credentials or badges or things, other types of credentialing at the four-year level, we can't be afraid to go sit at a table with the community colleges, the technical and vocational, and learn from them. And say, look, you're feeling a great set of needs. What are the gaps in what you're doing? What can't you do? What are things that we have in our toolkit that maybe could supplement? So at Berkeley, I've got cutting edge engineering technology research, right? Unparalleled in the world in most of our departments. Well, I don't need always to be generating researchers. What I'm often generating, or the learners that are coming through my door, are professionals and doers. And boy, they appreciate having access to that cutting edge, world class engineering technology as well, and leadership skills. And that's not something that you need a four-year degree for. It's not something that you have to take the whole course, undergraduate or graduate, but it is something that we can offer because of our place in the engineering field, the research field, that a technical vocational school isn't always able to offer. Right. And when we complement our opportunities, so at Stanford, I built a number of partnerships with community colleges and Stanford because we had this vision for what we could do as in our broader impact at Stanford. And it's the type of thinking that public institutions like Berkeley, that we're, in my new role at the Fung Institute, that we're looking at. How is it that we can take that public mission, that context in which we're living in, where it really matters that most people don't end up in the 4 years, where we've got some experts in the field who are in community colleges, technical, vocational, and, if we're fulfilling our public mission, we would be at in those same conversations and part of those. And that also has a policy dimension to it, because a lot of dollars in those worlds flow from workforce development funds, things like that, regional task force. And so it's important to me to have those four-year institutions get out of the old mindset that we only deal in four-year degrees, but as we think about lifelong, to also take a position of humility and learning, and then finding, hey, there's real opportunity in what we can do, and we can partner, and it benefits. The brand can certainly have benefits to the to your educational partners on that front. So I think some real opportunity there.
So the R1s are creating new knowledge.
Yes.
And part of the mission is to disseminate that new knowledge in a way that it can be applied.
Yeah.
And I think that is not necessarily to create more researchers or research, but to create application, to create impact in society.
Yeah.
What you were talking about earlier about what I'll call engagement over people's lifespan and how that engagement then connects them. I think with that 2/3 of the 4 million grads,
Sure.
it's a little less, but the 2/3, they may not go to college right now, but they may go at some later point. And as they rise in their career and become a supervisor or become whatever, as a leader in their organization or owning their own business or whatever they're doing, there may be a desire and a need for more education. And if you've been the go-to support, I think of two things. One, like you talked about with Stanford, instead of like I do this myself, like play well with others again. And how can, as a font, as a creator of knowledge, how can you disseminate collaboratively with other institutions who have that last mile connection with a community?
Yeah.
Maybe, actually providing input, a bolus of something to a technical institute that they wouldn't have been able to get to for years because you have a direct pipeline to make sure they're current.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the monetary benefit would be back to the school. Maybe there wouldn't be any. Maybe it would just be doing the right thing.
Yeah.
But that idea of if you've been engaged with a 17, 18-year-old as they're getting their whatever it is to do their job, when they're 30 and they need to, hey, you know what? I really never got my degree. And maybe it's not Berkeley, but a lot of the regional publics, this would be a perfect thing for them to do.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, fundamentally, if you're thinking about, and this is one of the gifts I think that lifelong learning or continuing education can give to those four-year institutions who are or have been primarily focused on the undergraduate and graduate, very young population, but really recognizing that people aren't always ready at 17 or 18 to engage in the type of learning that we traditionally provide at a four-year or a research institution for that younger class of student. That if, especially at state institutions like Berkeley and others, where we have that public mission, we recognize, and lifelong learning, is the leader in this, that maybe I'm ready at 30. Maybe it's because I've become a leader in an organization and suddenly I realize, I do have some gaps in what I need to know, and so I need to upskill in some particular areas. But that the core mission of lifelong and continuing education is the core mission is to reach those students in recognition that we all come to our educational and upskilling journey at different points. And if we're doing our job well, we're able to engage learners as their needs arise, and that will come throughout their lifespan, up to and including 100 years and beyond these days.
And knowledge management used to have, just in time, just right for the information, and just enough.
Yeah, that's
right. So, and I used to use those three: just in time, just enough, and just right.
Yeah.
The right information. So, what are some of your thoughts? Just closing thoughts on what's next? What's next for lifelong? What's next? What are you seeing? What do you think?
Yeah. So in lifelong, everybody's attentive to the demographic shift, where those in that 18 to 23 range, as a percentage of the population is reducing. Those 50 and older, as a percentage of the population, are increasing. So I think one is we're all paying attention to that demographic shift. And so anybody watching this probably has that on their radar already. I'm going to add a dimension to it with regard to that wealth transfer. I don't yet hear us as a field thinking about what happens after that wealth transfer. So I just indicated that there are two epical moments I think we're living through that have to do with that 65 and older learner who's looking at 20 plus years of wanting to make impact and finding something new and different. I mentioned the continuing in professional education, coming more into an awareness around development and advancement as part of their mission at the university, to an opportunity there. But after the wealth transfers down to 40-year-olds, 30-year-olds, so 10, 15 years, that wealth is now in another place. And so now you've got a whole generation of folks who are freed up financially, or at least some percentage are going to be freed up financially to be thinking differently about what they want.
Wait a minute. I want him to take care of me.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Oh my goodness.
Don't forget about Dad.
Right. So right now we're focusing on Dad, and then what happens to the kids. So that's one that's interesting. That's probably 10 or 15 years out for us in the field. But I'd like us, But I think now now we have an opportunity to start thinking about that.
That's interesting.
So that's one that I haven't heard. And then I think on the other end of the economic spectrum, we still have to solve the reality that too many folks aren't going to be in a financial position to be able to take time off of school or off of work. As we live longer, sandwich generation becomes wider later in life, right? Yeah. And so looking after our elder folks means we're not able to the elders in our community means we're not able to engage in our learning in our 40s and 50s in the way that was the case 10 or 20 years ago. And so new ways of learning for those who aren't going to be beneficiaries of that wealth transfer I indicated, who are still going to be working day to day, who are still going to have wishing they had time between caring for kids and caring for parents or elders, and having to work day to day and not having retirement saved or a real funding source to fund any advancement in their career, and yet have a desire to learn or a need to learn because they have to keep up with whatever field they're in. And so I think we still as a society have not solved the lower end of the spectrum, economic spectrum, in a way that I hope we can in our lifetime. And potentially, this philanthropic moment that we're living, this historic philanthropic moment we're living through, could be an answer, but it's not necessarily a sustainable answer. Mm-hmm. And certainly in an era of budget cuts for public institutions in particular, I think that it's going to be one of those things that could easily be dropped off the table because we need to survive financially as an organization. And so suddenly financial aid is the first thing that's cut, for example. So I think that's a real problem for us in an era of diminished budget cuts, a real opportunity for us in an era of wealth transfer and historic philanthropic moment, and one that's, to my mind, absolutely essential for our lifelong mission, for our democratic mission, for our impact mission.
I know from a marketing standpoint, one of the main reasons students struggle to sign up, register, enroll, apply is not the money. And when you talk about the sandwich, it's the time.
Yeah.
And the sandwich generation, the time it's a very real thing.
Yeah.
I realize that we've had a conversation now for 30 minutes, and you work in an engineering school that it's pretty up there, and we haven't mentioned AI once.
That's right. Can
you believe that?
That's right.
I mean, how funny is that? No, I'm actually reflectively chuckling about that. That's interesting.
And it's still the topic I speak the most on and have for the past 10 years.
Right. I mean, so, it's something that I just chuckle about. So before you go, I am having greater experiences with my prompts. I'm learning.
Yeah.
I'm learning how to get more, and I'm learning from what I get.
Yeah.
But I would put myself at a very low level user.
Yeah.
But where is education and all that when we have, I'll say, a guide on the side that's wicked smart.
That's right. That's right.
and growing in its smartness, but also what I'm experiencing now is growing in its relatability and ease of interaction. I mean, it was very clunky for me initially, but now it's getting a little bit more fluid, and I'll say seems like it's learning from my interaction with AI. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on where that's going.
Good. Well, Lee, as you know, the AI space is a space I spent much of my last 15 years, and I
can't believe we haven't.
I know exactly. So I'm appreciative of the question. So I think there are two tracks of AI. Everybody right now, or many folks in the public, are thinking about the broad generative AI models, the ChatGPTs, the Claudes, and things like this. that are in the vein that I think you're describing, right? You're engaging their learning more. They're broadly applicable. Foundation models is what we call them, or built on foundation models, a type of technology that can be broad based, but isn't narrowly focused necessarily yet. Requires additional fine tuning to get to that space. So I'll come back to that because that's the one everybody's thinking about right now. But I want to remind folks that much of AI also exists in a much more narrow and specific range of functions. So targeted or specific AI is an area that's been around for a long time and can be is different in a couple of significant ways from the broad-based AI that I think we're all thinking about. One, most important, is that it can be hyper accurate and super safe. So safety and accuracy is not something we think about when we think about the generative AIs with their hallucinations, with their errors, with the times that they find error, that they spit out errors or erroneous information pretty wildly, and can have people making pancakes out of glue or something like this, like we hear about in the news.
They don't fall apart.
That's right. So the narrow AI can be super safe. That's excellent. Not as good with syrup, but we get the idea. So with narrow AI, that's still a field where we have a lot of opportunity. In education, purpose-built AIs that can really track specific educational needs have been transformative in the way universities help students get to degree completion. So there are a number of universities who have piloted targeted narrow AI tools that sometimes look like chatbots. Behind the scenes look a lot like data crunching, machine learning out of the university's data to help identify when either a human advisor or a bot, a trained bot, would engage a learner to either finish a course or tackle an assignment or make course choices or career decisions that help them complete at a much higher rate than if they weren't engaged with these narrow AI systems. So that's just one example in education, but there are many, 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 many more. So first thing I want to remind folks is narrow AI is extraordinarily important, extraordinarily effective, and will continue to be a place where right now they're not getting the headlines, but a place where we can have tremendous impact and opportunity in the education space. Variety of fronts, teaching and learning included there. What these broad-based foundation models that we think about when we think about our generative AI models, they can do a lot of different things, and they continue to have, be error-prone and hallucinate, although that's getting better. They're continue to be great creative partners for us. So for brainstorming, for coming up with ideas that maybe are off the beaten track, if you know how to prompt well, etc. So what we have to always watch, is I think everybody's kind of aware of now in a way they weren't 3 years ago, is watch for their accuracy, watch for their truth metrics. So even the AI summaries that we're all getting right now as we do our Google searches or our other search engines, we know that they may not be accurate. And yet, folks, because of the way human-computer interaction actually works, there's an over-trusting of a faulty system there. So one of the educational dimensions that I think, that my teams have been leading on, or trying to lead on for about 10 years or so, has been helping our students, but also helping leaders in industry, government, and elsewhere understand the differences between those two systems and understand the biases that we humans tend to create for and against the outputs of either one of those systems, so that we can be more informed users, better informed users of systems when they're really effective versus when they're a little less effective or more error prone. And as they become more emotionally engageable, right? That's going to be even trickier because we're able to be manipulated a little bit more. We'll fall into those traps.
And as they get a physical presence.
Yes.
And so I think there's a term, it may already be there, but T-shaped AI.
Yeah.
T-shaped AI is, and so Ray Schroeder taught me this, that trying to do what you're talking about with starting my prompts extremely broad and asking it to gather very broad amount of information. And then instead of like I was going, make me this or show me this. I was going right for my end. I was trying to have that be in like one prompt, and then modifying. And so what I do now is I say gather everything you know about X. You don't have to publish it, but just do a survey and then narrow and narrow. And it's helped me get. And the other thing is, I was reading about does being polite and your prompts improve the results, and they said not really, but you feel like you're getting better results because it's responding in a style that maps to your prompt.
Yeah.
And so I think this is, in my mind, I remember when we could print, and I lived in Rochester, New York, where Xerox was and Kodak was, and when you could print something in 4-color, like it was fact when it first came out. Like, wow, like this is fact. And then the same thing happened with the website. If it was on a website, well, then this was fact. And now, if I do a search, because Google has been around for a while, search engines been around. Like if I did a prompt and it comes out this, like you said, that bias to believe.
Yeah.
And I think discernment. Our son's majoring in philosophy right now, and he's said to me on back to school on Sunday. He said, "You know, I can't believe we didn't take the logic course earlier in our philosophy." And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I can't believe we didn't have logic in like 9th grade or 10th grade.
When I really needed it as a parent.
Yeah, when you say nothing good happens after midnight. It's a so, but I do think we need to be pushing education around engagement with AI and the internet and social media so early. Like I think, I mean, when our kids were in kindergarten, this was 15, 20 years ago, they had this one unit which was, is it real or not real? And it was obviously like cartoon and a tree. It was not hard, right? But it's hard.
It's hard now,
and it's getting way harder. And I've opened phishing stuff that I'm pretty sophisticated in my, and I get a ton of stuff, but it's hard. And so I think we have I think there's a Berkeley, responsibility to so much, like to how to help people make sense out of things.
I think that's right. And there are some great organizations right now that are working as we did in the era of
smartphones,
post CNN, post Fox, coming out. So the multiplication of the 24-hour news network, where we needed a media literacy campaign in that K-12 space. And so Common Sense Media has been a big player in this world, right? For example. And there are
more than Common Sense.
Exactly.
But that's a great example.
And so these days, I mean, actually Common Sense was looking at this not too long ago, how it is that we can train like they do with media training for K-12. What do we need to do in the AI space, in the K-12 space, to help them learn how to discern truth from fiction and help mitigate some of those human biases as the computers learn. And by the way, the human programmers behind the computers learn that I can do a lot of social manipulation here, whether it's to help me buy my product or gain trust so that later I can do other things with those individuals. That's going to be an essential piece of this era. And going forward, as we go into embodied AI on the robotics side, which, again, 3 years ago, we thought robotics was being left behind in the AI revolution. But now 18 months, the past 18 months, we've really seen that robotics has found uses for the generative AI that we did not think about before broadly. And so now robotics is looking at a future that we couldn't have imagined 24 months ago. And so that embodied AI reality that we thought was going to lead, and then suddenly we thought maybe, okay, it's not going to lead because it's going to be left in the dark because so much data lives on the internet rather than an embodied spaces where it's harder to collect real data for AI. We're now looking at that as, okay, that's going to come sooner. And so our shifting thinking in the AI space is constant. And so now for a place like Berkeley, what we look to do is help leaders in industry and government and nonprofit understand those shifts as they happen, and then help them think about where they want us to be in the room, how to think about the implications of the shift that happened over the past 24 months, what things look like. We were moving in this direction, but now things aren't moving in this direction. Help us think that through. We're available to help those organizations. And we view that as part of our mission, as part of public impact, part of lifelong learning, part of being a top institution like Berkeley with the #1 ranked computer science department in the world, where we have a responsibility to help the broader society understand this moment, get through it, and then ultimately build for our shared success going forward. And so I think, there's a real opportunity, and there are good organizations that are taking that up outside the university, which we're thrilled to partner with. And then, of course, many of us inside the university, have our own opportunities to engage leaders at all stages of their career and are working on ways to think beyond just leaders too, for those who are dealing with the particulars in their job, whether it's AI or whether it's some other type of evolving moment. Yeah, all the way down to the K-12 space as well. My daughter, right now, an 8th grader, she knows the difference. She understands generative AI in a broad sense at an 8th grade level. And they're doing a good job in the Palo Alto school district, at least, of teaching her some of the basics of AI literacy for users, not AI literacy for technologists.
Right. Thank you so much, John. This has been wonderful.
It's great.
Really
Thank you, Lee. And for all you do for the field, too. It's
thanks.
wonderful.